So I'm starting out with, why is telling and retelling a story a very important accomplishment in the first place? It's because we dream, remember, anticipate, hope, despair, love, hate, believe, doubt, plan, construct, gossip, and learn in narrative. That's a different sound.
Sorry about that. I didn't unmute Maryellen.
Okay. So I was just mentioning that stories are important to tell in the first place and to retell because of all the uses of stories in our lives. It's not going to the next one, would you please? So a story is the jumping off point for almost every other language and literacy task. How can we anticipate, as in Carol Westby's prior quote, without being able to infer? How can we plan without thinking critically? How can we know what we believe without being able to form an argument? How can we know what we love or hate if we can't compare or contrast? How can we doubt if we can't take perspective of ourselves and others? How can we construct if we can't understand details or facts? If we can't tell a story, how can we learn when concepts and curriculum becomes challenging? Many of you have seen the next slide, and I like to show it because it shows the story grammar marker in its depth. At the top of this water analogy are dancing icons. So the icons are the eye-catching part of the story grammar marker, but they're only one little part. As you know, those of you who have delved into our tools, the developmental sequence, which is based on theory and research that is in textbooks and articles, serves as a grouping, a way to group the icons in order to teach, in order to do therapy, in order to analyze other children's books and situations. And at the very bottom of the water, we see the critical thinking triangle, which sets the story grammar marker apart from other things and is our main tool for thinking. It involves the kickoff, the feeling, the plan, and mental states, as well as words that are conjunctions and cohesive ties for sentence making. So here is the sequence of narrative development from stage 1 to stage 7. Stage 7 is more like a novel. Stage 1 is looking at characters within a setting. And as an analogy, we have a new roadmap analogy for the journey toward deep discourse, because that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about what happens after we get to the complete episode and how we use that information. So in this roadmap along the landscape of action, Bruner's landscape of action and the landscape of consciousness, are the first 3 stages, which are we try to get our children to get over a period of time. They notice the setting, they notice the characters within the setting, they notice the actions, they put the actions in order, they use cohesive ties. They get to the point where they can identify the kickoff, which is the all-important cause-effect chain. And then as we progress to the landscape of consciousness through the terrain. We look at the feelings, the development of feelings, the development of plans in the complete episode. And then we journey on further to interactive episodes where there's more than one kickoff. Now that's life, or that's a novel. And also finally to the complex episode, when there's something that happens that is a kickoff for somebody else to make a plan and do something. So I thought this analogy with the terrain in front of you is kind of a good analogy to follow because of where we begin and where we're hoping to get our students. So this is the graphic of the entire episode, the complete episode, which is our goal at the beginning, and then we add to that. So we're looking here at a circle and encircling the critical thinking triangle components. The critical thinking triangle is the kickoff, the emotion or the feeling, how a character thinks, what he knows for a fact, what he remembers from the past, what he realizes from his experience, what he believes. There are many, many mental state words. And all of those give rise to a plan, what the character wants to do. And I have circled here the cohesive ties that enable us to formulate sentences pertaining to the critical thinking triangle. So the critical thinking triangle is what's missing from so many children's narratives. It's also what sets the story grammar marker apart. It involves the motivation for the character. It helps us generate inference because feelings sometimes are not mentioned, and of course, thoughts are not verbalized. Perspective taking, it assists with perspective taking. We know that we could have one kickoff that causes several feelings and ultimately leads to a new plan, a different plan. Practice with classroom discourse using cohesive ties. It's good for theory of mind, getting into the mind of other characters, critical thinking, problem solving, resolution of conflicts on the schoolyard and other places, social communication, reading comprehension, and of course, written expression. So the building blocks of oral language, I've always show this diagram just as a point of entrance here. The colorful blocks on the bottom are the strands of oral language which go into forming discourse and which speech and language pathologists, reading teachers, special education teachers focus on. There's the pragmatics or the social uses of language, the sound system, the semantics or the vocabulary, the syntax, the word order in a sentence, and then discourse, conversation, narrative, and exposition. Without discourse, there's not an efficient connection between oral language and literacy. So as we're trying to get our students to develop their sentences, use adequate and above adequate vocabulary, and perfect their sound system, we're also trying to get them to tell a story, to tell us what they've been doing. The text structures are different for conversation, for narrative, and for exposition. And there are many, many articles calling for attention to text structure. The one we're going to concentrate on tonight is the narrative text structure. We can help children develop what I call literate oral language by assisting them in progressing along the oral literate continuum. Of course, beginning with conversation at home, in preschools, and in elementary schools, and wherever we can engage children. The ability to tell their story, personal stories, which are narratives, and also retellings and tellings. And then looking to the right, we're looking at expository text or the text of information. And the call is for us to talk about or converse about stories and the information contained in them. So this next slide is a slide from 1980. It's my one of my group of language samples that I took on my son, Jerry. who is my youngest child and is now 41. And I did many, many of these for my graduate classes that I taught speech and language development to. So this is Laura Lee's developmental sentence scoring. And it was around and used for a long time to look at what kinds of pronouns and verbs and questions and conjunctions that students were using and how they were developing them. So storytelling is full of sentences, but it's also a social activity. And young children rely on their caregivers to structure coherent stories with them via conversation. And this is an ASHA Perspectives article that I recommend. So in order to lead into where we go after the complete episode, I wanted to just kind of focus on where we start as well. And we start in conversation that shows deepening discourse. And I'm going to show you a conversation that I had with my grandson, Declan, building the narrative mode of thought through a conversation. So in this, I'd like you to notice how I'm using with him social problem solving. He's building empathy for his Nana, the use of cohesion in sentences, listening comprehension by both of us, critical thinking that he does, and perspective taking that he does. So here's the conversation that I had with Declan when we were together on March 30th, 2019.
I just want to interrupt you to announce to everyone that I will send a link to the slides tomorrow when they get a follow-up email. So not to worry about not having.
Sheila will send a link to the slides tomorrow when you get a follow-up email. I'm sure you'll enjoy having that. So on March 30th, I had a chance to be with Declan by myself. He's 4.5 years old. And when I got to their house with the intent on taking him to an ice cream store that we frequently, he showed me a paper airplane model that his brother Jerry had made. And he wanted to fly it for me. And then I asked to fly it too. But as I let the plane go, instead of a perfect arc, as Declan had done, mine grazed the end of the coffee table directly in front of Declan. So I asked an open-ended question, which we're encouraged to ask young children. And I used a particular kind of open-ended question. I used a mental state of wondering. So I said, I wonder why the plane touched the table when I threw it. And when you threw it, it didn't touch anything. And of course, I was looking very puzzled. So Declan said, Nana, sorry, just a second.
I just was told that there's a bunch of pictures in the background. I'm sorry, everybody. We're not used to this. I know how to shut this down. Okay, that should work. I'm very sorry about that. Thank goodness that people tell us these things so that we can make sure to fix them. Thank you.
I think it is a series of kickoffs. So Declan, when I asked him, I wonder why the plane touched the table when I threw it, and when you threw it, it didn't touch anything. He said, Nana, it's why you are a Nana and I'm a kid. A kid has better aim, and that's why you didn't get it over the table. Kids aren't like Nanas. Nanas are a little bit old, but not really old. You're a little bit old, right, Nana? Nana nodded. Not like Meme, who's my husband's mother. Meme is a lot old, Is she 67 now? Nana. Meme is 98, almost 100 years old. Declan. So, Nana, you are only a little bit of 100, right? Nana. Yes, Declan, I'm only a little bit of 100. Declan, those were great sentences you said. I wrote them down so I could remember them. Declan, those are real sentences, right? He had a big smile as he looked at my language sample. Nana, right. You did a great job saying them all. Nana, Declan, how about going to get ice cream with me at the ice cream store? All of a sudden, out of the blue, we heard Google. Ice cream was invented in China. Nana, how come Google is talking about ice cream? Declan, Google is up there, he points upstairs. Nana, Google knows about ice cream, but she doesn't know about the ice cream store and the Domino's game there. Google doesn't have eyes, only ears. I need to get my shoes on. So, of course, we checked out whether Google was right or not, and the origin of ice cream was in China. So that's a little bit of information text there. So oral language is the foundation of writing. It's the foundation of how we express what we comprehended when we're doing reading comprehension. And the discourse level contains sentences and vocabulary. So I wanted to just briefly analyze what Declan did. I asked the open-ended question and posed a problem. And he gave me an answer. He gave me a character description. He was comparing and contrasting youth, since he's a kid, and elders. He also used his prior knowledge about myself and my mother-in-law. In explaining abstract comments like you're a little bit old, abstract concepts, you're a little bit old, he used compare and contrast, and he verified his description of a little bit old. He used a joint referent. We both know meme. So he was using comparing and contrasting in a very deep way. So Nana, you are only a little bit of 100, right? He was confirming his hypothesis that I was only a little bit old. When he said, right, and he smiled as if to say, isn't that great that you're a little bit old, only a little bit old? That's empathy. So here's Declan. And when I said those were great sentences and he had quite a bit of delight looking at them, he was developing metalinguistic skills, talking with Nana about language. He was very, very proud. When Google came about, it was a kickoff for both of us. It surprised me and it surprised him. And his explanation included some clarification for me. There was a mental state verb in what he said. There was a prepositional phrase, an adversative conjunction but, a contraction, and a pronoun. He also had a character description of Google, inferring she because of her voice, and that she only had ears, not eyes, and wouldn't know about the Mount Tom ice cream store. So I thought it was a great, in-depth conversation. And when we have in-depth conversations like that in response to an open-ended question, we're really using developing narrative skills in young children. And at this time, it was the level of character setting, initiating event. So a narrative selection of quality children's literature is next that we've got to illustrate deepening discourse. And the book is called Those Shoes. With all story grammar marker materials throughout the years, we have used the quality children's literature that was the example at the Curtis Blake Day School. This one is by Mary Beth Boltz, and the illustrator is Noah Jones.
This is, oh, Sheila was just telling me this is one of the things that we're raffling at the end. I have dreams about those shoes. Now, I'd like you to be thinking about this boy, what he's thinking, what he's feeling, what he's doing and saying, and what others are doing and saying. I have dreams about those shoes, black high tops, 2 white stripes. Here he is drawing, and he's drawing pictures of those shoes that he has seen. Grandma, I want them. There's no room for want around here, just need, Grandma says, and what you need are new boots for the winter. Brandon T comes to school in those shoes. He says he's the fastest runner now, not me. I was always the fastest before those shoes came along. Nate comes to school in those shoes. Antonio and I count how many times Nate goes to the bathroom, 7 times in one day, just so he can walk up and down in the hall real slow. Next, Alan, Jacoby, and Terrence each get a pair. Then one day, in the middle of kickball, one of my shoes comes apart. Looks like you could use a new pair, Jeremy, Mr. Alfre, the guidance counselor, says. He brings out a box of shoes and other stuff he has for kids who need things. He helps me find the only shoes that are my size, Velcro, like the ones my little cousin Marshall wears. They have an animal on them from a cartoon I don't think any kid ever watched. It's a picture of Mr. Alfre. When I come back to the classroom, Ellen Jacoby takes a look at my Mr. Alfre shoes and laughs. So do Terrence, Brandon T, and everyone else. The only kid not laughing is Antonio Parker. At home, Grandma says, "How kind of Mr. Alfre." I nod and turn my back. I'm not going to cry about any dumb shoes. But when I'm writing my spelling words later, every word looks like the word shoes, and my grip is so tight on my pencil, I think it might bust. On Saturday, Grandma says, "Let's check out those shoes you're wanting so much. I got a little bit of money set aside, might be enough, you never know." At the shoe store, Grandma turns those shoes over so she can check the price. When she sees it, she sits down heavy. "Maybe they wrote it down wrong," I say. Grandma shakes her head. Then I remember the thrift shops. What if there's a rich kid who outgrew his or got 2 pairs for Christmas and had to give one of them away? We ride the bus to the first thrift shop. Black cowboy boots, pink slippers, sandals, high heels, every kind of shoe except the ones I want. We ride the bus to the second thrift shop, not a pair of those shoes in sight. Around the corner is the third thrift shop. I see something in the window. Those shoes, black shoes with 2 white stripes, high tops, perfect shape, $2.50. My heart is pounding hard as I take off my shoes and hitch up my baggy socks. "How exciting," Grandma says. "What size are they?" I shove my foot into the first shoe, curling my toes to get my heel in. I don't know, but I think they fit. Grandma kneels on the floor and feels for my toes at the end of the shoe. "Oh, Jeremy," she says, "I can't spend good money on shoes that don't fit." I pull the other shoe on and try to walk around. "They're okay," I say, holding my breath and praying that my toes will fall off right then and there. But my toes don't fall off. I buy them anyway, with my own money. And I squeeze them on and limp to the bus stop. At home, a few days later, Grandma puts a new pair of snow boots in my closet and doesn't say a word about my 2 big feet shuffling around in my 2 small shoes. "Sometimes shoes stretch," I say. Grandma gives me a hug. I check every day, but those shoes don't stretch. I have to wear my Mr. Alfre's to school instead. One day, during math, I glance at Antonio's shoes. One of them is taped up, and his feet look smaller than mine. After school, I head to the park to think. Antonio was there, the only kid who didn't laugh at my Mr. Alfre shoes. We shoot baskets, a loose piece of tape on Antonio's shoe smacks the concrete every time he jumps. I think, I'm not going to do it. We leap off the swings. I'm not going to do it. We race from one end of the playground to the other. I'm not going to do it, I say. Do what? Antonio says, breathing hard. Grandma calls me for supper and invites Antonio over too. After supper, he spies my shoes. How come you don't wear them? Antonio asks. I shrug. My hands are sweaty. I can feel him wishing those shoes were his. That night, I'm awake for a long time thinking about Antonio. When morning comes, I try on my shoes one last time. Before I can change my mind, the shoes are in my coat. Snow is beginning to fall as I run across the street to Antonio's apartment. I put the shoes in front of his door, push the doorbell, and run. At school, Antonio is smiling big in his brand new shoes. I feel happy when I look at his face and mad when I look at my Mr. Alfre shoes. But later, when it's time for recess, something happens. Everywhere there's snow. Leave your shoes in the hall and change into your boots, the teacher announces. Leave your shoes in the hall. It's then I remember what I have in my backpack. New boots, new black boots that no kid has ever worn before. Standing in line to go to recess, Antonio leans forward and says, thanks. I smile and give him a nudge. Let's race. Now that's a wonderful multi-episodic story from several perspectives. And that's why I chose it to do the webinar today, to show advancement in narrative development from the complete episode. It's, Sheila said, a lot of people love it. It is a wonderful book. You could spend a lot of lesson time on those shoes. So retelling of the story of those shoes at stage 5, the complete episode level, is what we're going to do. This book is written at a stage 7, interactive episodes, because the various kickoffs that happened to Antonio, for instance, his grandmother responded, and so did Mr. Alfre. And we're going to get into that as we progress. So quickly, this is the story grammar marker outline of the episode, where Jeremy is the character. He sees everyone at school with the shoes on that he has, that he wants. He dreams about the shoes at home. The kickoff is his grandma tells him that they can't afford them. He feels envious and disappointed. He's envious of others. He's disappointed that he can't have them. His thought, what does he know for a fact? He knows for a fact that his current shoes are falling apart. He wants those shoes, but he really needs winter boots, according to Grandma. What happens? The guidance counselor gives him a Velcro pair of shoes, but he thinks they're babyish and everyone makes fun of him, except Antonio. He goes to a thrift store, several thrift stores, and buys a pair with his own money, but they're too small and hurt his feet. At school, he notices Antonio's shoes are duct taped at recess, so he gives those shoes to Antonio, who is grateful. The consequence is when it snows and Jeremy remembers that Grandma bought him brand new winter boots that no kid has ever worn before. As a resolution, he learned, what was the lesson? That those shoes weren't as important as he once thought. Having warm boots, a loving grandma, a caring teacher, and a chance to help a friend were all things that made him happy too. So this is the complete episode retelling of those shoes. And I remember telling most of you at workshops, those who have attended one, that if it's at a stage 7, if the book is at a stage 7 itself, it's also a 6, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. So that you can really use any book with any child as long as you keep the developmental sequence in order.
Is that, you know, when I look at this, I think about, you know, how many of our students could actually pack this much into a retelling of a whole book? I mean, the book is written at a stage 7. There's so much in it. And this is something that we did as an example. And it was time consuming, you know, and Maryellen's the expert. So.
And so we were looking at major events in this complete episode. Now we're going to be taking it apart because of curricular demands happen as children get older. So one of the things to deepen comprehension and deepen the talk or the discourse about it is the concept of taking perspectives of multiple characters. And this book lent itself very well to doing that. We took the perspective at the complete episode level of Jeremy, Grandma, Antonio, Mr. Alfre. We also could have talked about the other kids, what they were thinking and what they were doing. So there were actually 3 episodes in the book, and each episode has 2 perspectives. Episode 1 is Grandma, and the kickoff for her is that Jeremy said he wanted those shoes, and of course he was drawing pictures of them. He was doing his homework, and everything was coming back to wanting those shoes. Jeremy in episode 1 sees the shoes advertised and wore all around his neighborhood. He's determined to get them. He knows his grandma will help him, and he wants the new pair of shoes. So he goes to ask her. Then he goes to the thrift shop. So all of those things, this is Jeremy's episode. Episode 2 is the episode with Mr. Alfre, the guidance counselor. What's the kickoff for him? He sees the condition of Jeremy's shoes, and he acts upon that because we infer that he has empathy for Jeremy. He realizes that Jeremy's embarrassed because his shoes are falling apart, and he wants or decides to do something. Episode 3 involves Antonio. Antonio notices Jeremy has the shoes, and he's confused. He remembers how much Jeremy loves the shoes, and he finds the shoes on his doorstep. Jeremy realizes the kickoff for him is his shoes don't stretch, and he notices that Antonio's shoes are taped. So as we went through the book, we took and made an episode, whether we had to infer the feeling, infer the plan, determine what the character knew and remembered. This is why I say there could be many lessons at this point that you would do in your therapy or your classrooms. So one of the things that we really like to do is to use pocket charts. And in the pocket charts, we place our icons, the universal magnet set, because as children get older, although they can still use the manipulatives, not the doll, but the story grammar marker. I have Brady the doll in back of me. But they do use the story grammar marker, but then transfer to something like the icons in a pocket chart, where we can use sentence strips and things like that. So this is the beginning, the middle, and the end. And this is what we like to do, is to put the elements of those episodes that we analyzed into the pocket chart according to the perspective of the characters, where students can see, oh yes, in that episode there were 2 characters, and each one of them had a different kickoff, a different plan, different feeling. And so they begin to tell their story that way. We're looking at Jeremy and Antonio. we're looking again at Jeremy and Antonio after Antonio receives the shoes. Okay. Now, I wanted to mention that I thought I would focus on the writing Common Core standards for this particular webinar. And beginning in grade 4, the reading standards are brought into the writing area. So the reading standard would be, for instance, draw evidence from literary or informational texts. So here we have narrative and expository to support analysis, reflection, and research. Apply grade 4 reading standards to literature. So what are those grade 4 reading standards? Describe in depth the character, setting, or event in a story, drawing on specific details in the text, a character's thoughts, words, or actions. And in grade 5, it's comparing and contrasting 2 or more characters, settings, or events in a story or drama, drawing on specific details in the text. I was thinking that Declan did that, comparing his Nana to his Meme, his great-grandmother. But anyway, if we go back to this, we're going to talk about this one. Describing in depth the character, setting, or event in a story, drawing on specific details involving the character's thoughts, words, or actions. So here would be the application of learning how to tell the episodes, because now we're going to have to look at the story and explain our point of view. So this is explain the main character's problem, and then describe how this character responds to the problem. We could call it responds to the challenge, responds to the trouble. Include evidence from the text about how the character's thoughts and emotions led him or her to take action. In order to do this, we have to tune into the character's thoughts and emotions. What do we need to know? We need to identify the kickoff. Kickoff could be a problem, a challenge, a trouble. The character's feelings, the mental states, what plan was made, what was done to carry out the plan, what the result was, and then the all-important lesson that was learned because of what the character did to deal with his challenge or problem. This is called the literary essay and often results in a 5-paragraph essay. Sure.
Well, we have a little break here. We are nearing, of course, now I don't have a clock on me.
I do.
We are about at 7:30, and I sent this message in the chat, so some of you might have gotten it, but others I don't think have the chat part open. I know Maryellen doesn't. I'm monitoring that though, so if you do have a question, just let me know. But we are going to go about 15 minutes over, so I'm sorry about that. You will still have access to everything through the recording. If you have to leave us early, I'm going to send you the recording link tomorrow, along with a link to the slides, so you can physically have that handout. I will send you a discount code and some special offerings that we'll have for you. It will be good until Friday. So don't think you have to jump off for personal or professional reasons that you're not going to be able to get access, because Maryellen's got some really, really good stuff coming up in the next 15 minutes. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. So here I am at deepening critical thinking. So that standard that I just read calls for investigating, elaborating, and expanding on the story in order to answer in an expository way, picking out what was it and how did the character respond. So one of the things that we use is our critical thinking triangle in action that some of you might have It's how to use the critical thinking triangle. And here is an example of one of the mats, the critical thinking mats, where children actually take the feeling and put the feeling in a slot and the mental state, and they talk it through. What happens, how the character feels. He feels that way because he thought about something. And then he was able to make his plan. And in this case, we're talking about Jeremy couldn't fall asleep because he was thinking of Antonio. So in this critical thinking triangle in action kit, we have bookmarks on basic emotions, because we talk about happy, sad, mad, scared, surprised, and disgusted, which are basic emotions. There are synonyms here for the basic emotions. And then on the other side, there are the social emotions, which depend on the situation that's going on. They aren't a solid happy, they aren't a solid sad. They may be a combination of several emotions. So here is an example of that mat that I just showed you. The little pockets are aside the heart and aside the mental state, because when we think about why we feel the way we do, we can often get to a plan to solve our problem. So at the beginning, Jeremy was curious. He was thinking of these things. He recalled that he was curious because he thought Antonio's feet were smaller than his as he was in his math class. He then felt grateful as he remembered that as he remembered that Antonio didn't laugh at his Mr. Alfre shoes the way the other kids did in the classroom. He also felt grateful because he knew for a fact that he had a loving grandma, a caring guidance counselor who were both trying to replace his old shoes to help him. He felt discouraged. When he felt discouraged, he knew that those shoes were making him limp. He knew that for a fact. And he had blisters because they were much too small. He felt empathetic because he realized during basketball and on the swings that Antonio's shoes were held together with duct tape as his were. He was actually putting himself into those shoes. And he felt empowered finally because he believed that because of all of these thoughts, he could help his friend Antonio. And therefore, he decided to do what? He decided to give those shoes to Antonio. This is a wonderful tool to use. It enables us to make up sentences using because, so, and, when, therefore, because, and expand our sentence structures, which we're working on as we're working on the content of the episode. So one day, Jeremy was in his bedroom at night in bed trying to fall asleep, but he couldn't sleep because he was thinking about Antonio and those shoes. The words, "I'm not going to do it," kept running through his head. He felt empathetic about Antonio. He felt discouraged about not having those shoes and confused about what he should do. Because of these feelings, Jeremy needed to think. So what did he do? He thought about Antonio's feet that were smaller than his. He remembered that Antonio didn't laugh when the other kids laughed at his Mr. Alfre shoes. He knew for a fact that those shoes were making him limp and causing blisters. He realized that Antonio's shoes were held together with duct tape and he really needed new shoes. Jeremy knew that he had a loving grandma and a caring guidance counselor who were trying to replace his falling apart shoes. After supper, Jeremy noticed that Antonio wished those shoes were his, and he believed that he could help his friend Antonio. So after much thought, Jeremy decided to give those shoes to Antonio. So what did we do? We mined that critical thinking triangle portion of the episode in order to explain the main character's problem. And then describe how the character responded to the problem. In order to respond to the problem, he needed to think about a plan. We included evidence from the text about how the character's thoughts and emotions led him or her to take action. That was definitely dealing with the lesson prompt. It wasn't just telling the story or retelling the story or answering comprehension, WH comprehension questions. It was using critical elements of the story to answer a prompt. Deepening social problem solving through sentence building prompts. I just wanted to mention that one of the things that we're going to talk about or show you later is that all of this is coming from a new book, a new manual that I've written, Deepening Discourse and Thought. And inside it are these prompts that I'm going to show you, these prompt cards for sentence formation. This is just an example. Prompt 3 is to look at the situation and say, is there a kickoff? Did something unexpected happen? Is there a problem? Yes. Remember that there may be actions in a social situation. Some of them are kickoffs because the ho-hum day is not ho-hum. The expected happenings are not happening as we thought they might do. So Jeremy's shoes came apart and Mr. Alfre gave him babyish Velcro shoes. That is definitely a kickoff. Prompt 3C, if there was a kickoff, how did Jeremy feel about Mr. Alfre's shoes? He was embarrassed, humiliated, and angry. How do you know he felt that way? That's a question that poses deeper thought. He thought his shoes were babyish and his classmates laughed at him. What did his body language show you? He looked annoyed that his shoes broke. That's in the top picture. He was disgusted by Mr. Alfre's shoes. Then in the third one, his shoulders were hunched in the classroom, although we only see his back. And then in the last one, he gripped his pencil so tight it might bust. So those are showing actions that show feelings that have to be interpreted. So we have to look at the illustrations as well as the text. Prompt 4, express the situation as you or the character see it. Choose one of these problem-solving sentence makers. We chose the second one. Jeremy was playing kickball at the playground when all of a sudden his shoe fell apart. He felt annoyed and probably embarrassed. So these are sentence stems, but they are referenced by icons. So they carry the icons even deeper. So deepening empathy. Find evidence in the book about empathy. What were the words, the actions, the body language, the tone of voice, and the facial expressions that help us infer that a character is feeling empathetic? We can feel empathy for a character when we take perspective and put ourselves in their shoes, kind of a play on words. So in this picture, Mr. Alfre feels empathy toward Jeremy because his shoe fell apart and Mr. Alfre knows Jeremy is in need of shoes. Antonio has empathy because he didn't laugh. We found out later that Jeremy's shoes are duct taped too. Grandma feels empathy toward Jeremy because she knows that he deeply wanted those shoes and she feels badly that they don't fit and have given him blisters. Jeremy reflects on Grandma, Mr. Alfre, and most importantly, Antonio, and feels empathy for Antonio, which helps him to decide to give Antonio those shoes. So, how did the events in the story lead to the character's growth as a person might be another fourth grade prompt. And as a result of his experiences with those shoes and empathy shown to him by the people in his life, Jeremy came to realize that having a caring family, teachers, and friends was more important than those shoes. But it was not only telling the story, it was seeking the evidence and knowing where to seek the kickoff and the response to the kickoff.
Is on the phone. It's on the webinar. Not over-focus.
Well, sometimes they do over-focus on the details, and I put together, show them the story grammar marker as a whole, as the gestalt. And I tell them that wherever their details were, are a certain part of the story grammar marker. But what are we going to do? We have to get all these other details, because the other details give you the whole. And that's really the reason, Elise, I'm glad to hear you came tonight. That's really the reason for the manipulative itself. It's to show the gestalt. And when kids zero in on just details about something, we want them to be able to go to the others. So, excuse me, interdisciplinary pathways to deepen discourse. I'll need that quote after. Deepening discourse and thought development chart. I thought you'd like to see this. This also has a water analogy, and it's taking the parts of the story grammar marker developmental sequence, dividing them into 4 sections and coupling them with certain text types of information text, because there is a call for interdisciplinary work, which is work with English language arts and history, or English language arts and science, or English language arts and math, or math and science. So we're looking at various stages of development of narrative. Could we teach parts of information text as well? And if a child is able to give you a character, a setting, and actions, they're very able to give you character description, like Abraham Lincoln, listing and sequencing, which are part of the action sequence concept in narrative. And also, they probably will be able to compare and contrast, like Declan did. So these 4 sections are recognizing the general situation, identification of the causal chain, which is the next step up in difficulty, in deepening thought. The third is problem solving. Once you have the cause, you can know that that's probably the problem. How do you feel about it? What's the thought? What's the plan? And then ultimately, if this is clockwise, you get to the deepest water, which is synthesis of problem solving and the development of argument. Unless you understand the problem, you can't develop an argument. What about the child who can't take perspective? He only argues from his own perspective. So all the things that we're doing with multiple perspective taking from a book like Those Shoes will enable us to perform better as we are faced with the challenges of the curriculum. You'll see the circle in the middle. One side is Bloom's taxonomy, questions and concepts. This side is Webb's DOK, or the depth of knowledge questions. The questions kind of coincide with the level of thought. So the text structures that we've talked about tonight, we talked about conversation, narrative, and exposition. On the other side of that chart are the stages of narrative development, the expository text structures, the text types in information text. Notice that stage 5 in narrative is the same thing as the sixth expository text structure of problem solution. Way over to the right, it shows you how those text structures come together for teaching, all governed by where the child is in his narrative development. So if a child is, I mentioned, if a child is able to give you an action sequence in a narrative, he should be listing and sequencing in expository text as well. If a child is able to tell a story at the complete episode, most likely he can use it for problem solution in social studies and in social communication. So we have to recognize the general situation. These are books that I recommend for looking at the general situation. That's quadrant 1. And then the references. I thought you'd like to have the references.
Again, we're going to be giving
Yes. Identification of the causal chain. These are the references for identification of the causal chain. Problem solving. These are some of my favorite books for problem solving. And this is synthesis of problem solving. So it's like analysis and synthesis, like the 4th and 5th grade prompts were. Development of an argument. You have to be able to look at 2 people at least, see how you feel about it, how they feel about it, you think about, you have to infer. Quadrant 4 is discourse development. So, yes.
Angeli asked, how do we deepen students' ability to use appropriate words describing feelings? My students often use, you can't hear anybody? Okay, all right. So she asked, how do we deepen students' ability to use appropriate words when describing feelings? My students often use sad, mad, and happy as emotions. How do we develop the distinction between ashamed and embarrassed? I brought over a couple of things that I thought you could show because I know that we've used them. And
Yes.
with the
And so they use, so the problem is that they stick with the basic emotions. And the thing about the basic emotions, before you get into what is called social emotions, a lot of times they don't have synonyms for the basic emotions. So that's one step of developing the vocabulary for emotion, for the expression of emotions. Social emotions depend on the social situation that's going on. Embarrassed is that you're probably a little bit angry about something that happened. You're sad that it happens. You feel foolish about it. So talking about why each of those little emotions form a social emotion is an excellent way to do this. So, you know, the picture we have, the webinar has, we'll send out the webinar that has the attention to social emotions for you to look at. We'll send the name of that webinar tomorrow, but it has a picture of Cinderella's stepmother and her 2 stepsisters. And by the expression on their face, you don't really get what they're thinking and what leads to the social emotion component. So one of the things I also have kids do is make these little things out of popsicle sticks, and we put those right over the faces or the groups of faces or their own face. And we talk about the development of emotions. So there's a difference between the basic emotions, happy, sad, mad, scared, surprised, and disgusted. So we teach those 6. We teach the synonyms for them. And then we go about talking about combinations of them for social emotions.
I'm just going to, so we're going to be doing our drawing in a minute. Maryellen just wanted to end with a quote, and I think I put it at the beginning by accident. So I'm going to find it. Yes, that's it.
Oh, yes.
So
I wanted to end by this quote. We're coming from Massachusetts, Western Mass, 90 miles west of Boston. And I'm a licensed elementary school teacher and speech and language pathologist in the state of Massachusetts. So I receive emails from DESE, which is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. And one just that I received just the other day was calling for people to comment on a shift and to embrace a shift to applied deeper learning to engage students in interdisciplinary tasks aligned to the state standards, where students would use critical thinking skills and work collaboratively to solve problems relevant to their lives. I imagine their social communication problems. They may be things that are going on in the world that they want to talk about, read stories about, read information text about. So as I was thinking of what I had already planned for this webinar, that this is what students need to lead up to embracing interdisciplinary tasks. They need to be at home with conversation, with narrative, and with expository text structures. So I thank you for coming and for
there's a few more questions, and we will definitely answer them. But what I want to do is do the raffle, because there are some people who do have to leave, and so I'm going to do the raffle right now, and then Maryellen will be back to answer your questions. But don't think we're leaving you on your question.
also, if you have questions that you'd like to talk with me about, feel free to call me.
On the 888 number on our website.
Oops.
I love to talk to people.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my screen. Okay, so I'm gonna show you really quick first. Can you see what I'm doing?
I see.
This is our website. I hope you can see what I'm showing you.
Yes.
We have a blog. See where I'm pointing to? Oop, this blog right here, MindWing blog, up here in the corner. On our website, we have so many different lessons. I encourage you to look, because what we showed tonight is a fraction of what we probably have in the blog that my aunt, Maryellen's sister, my aunt Sheila, has worked hard on for years now, since she retired from teaching for 38 years.
And every one she used.
And every one of these lessons is something she used with her students. So they've been tried for 38 years or for however long she was using Storygram or marker. But this is one using those feeling frames. The one on the left there is my nephew and one of his best friends on the right. They're trying to look sad, I guess. But this is an example, and there's Frankie. But this is an example of using those frames. I know a couple of you sent me messages in the chat that you were interested in those. So, look those up. And let me just so I'm gonna show you this. This is our, okay. This is our special offer. Can you see me okay? Can't see myself for some reason.
Yes,
Okay.
I can see you.
Our special offer is until Friday, 20% off all items in our online store. you can use the discount code discourse20 at checkout. I put an easier URL link at the bottom because I don't know if you can click on the screen. I don't think you can. So I figured if you had to write it down, it's https://tinyurl.com/deepsgm, deep story grammar marker. And these are, I just want to show you, that's going to bring you to a page with these new, you can order anything in the store. It's not limited to this, but these are our 3 new sets of materials based on, you know, what we talked about tonight, deepening discourse and thought. I don't know if that, I can't,
I see
I
it.
can see myself. So
Yes.
the deepening discourse and thought kit all the way on the left has in it that manual. It has the discourse and thought development chart, which is here. Oh, Maryellen, are you on still? Oh, good. You can be Vanna and show all these things while I'm. Can you see me at all?
I can see you.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
We're still learning. And then and then you also get the critical thinking triangle and action set. That's the one Maryellen was showing with the feelings and plans and the little pocket charts. And then you get up in the right hand corner of that picture, you can see it's a giant 36 by 24 pocket chart. It looks small in that picture, but that's not to scale. You get our magnets.
Oh, the raffle.
I'm going to get to the raffle right after this. Yeah. And then you also get story grammar marker and theme maker stickers. So it's a huge, huge value for $159.95. But the exciting thing is that you can also get 20% off of that. So that is I mean, I know I work here, but that's an absolute steal for what you're getting, in my opinion. But the other thing in the middle is the deepening discourse and thought quick start. And that's, you know, if you're someone who might have some of our other materials, you may want to stick with this. And also all of the kits include those shoes, the actual book. So in this one, you get Deepening Discourse and Thought manual, those shoes book, you get the Discourse and Thought development chart, and you also get our story grammar marker icon kit or set, which is mini magnets and of story grammar marker and theme maker, so for narrative and expository text, and then also narrative and expository mini stickers. And then you also get a critical thinking triangle mini poster for some focus on that. And then all the way to the right, Deepening Discourse and Thought manual and the companion book and chart. Because the chart and the book are so integral in the manual, they come as a set. And so that's probably the biggest steal of all. You kind of have everything you need, and whether you are whether this is a supplement to using story grammar marker for years, or whether you're kind of new to it. So that is my little explanation to you. If you want to really get started, if you have questions about, you know, ordering something, call us anytime.